My name is John Pasfield, and the title of this reading will be The Poetic Novel, Video 2, T.S. Eliot. So here's the book that I'm reading from, The Poetic Novel, Influences and Elements by John Pasfield. That's me. So, aside from this manuscript, it's not a printed book and is not for sale on the internet or in a bookstore. It is available for free access on my website, which is johnpasfield, all one word, .ca. Just click the cover icon and the book will be yours to read. It has 15 chapters and 75,000 words. Its subtitle is Elements and Influences, and each chapter explores the origins of the form and techniques for the poetic novel that I've developed over a writing career of about 25 years and over 30 novels and novellas. I don't have a particular book from which I chose the following quotations from the writings of T.S. Eliot, as they're taken from a number of books and essays. In the interest of brevity, I'll read a number of my responses to the ideas of T.S. Eliot, and then I will read the rest of the Eliot quotations which are responded to in my book, and which you can read for free if you go to my website. So, note 2 in this book is T.S. Eliot. Here's me speaking first, and I'll quote from Eliot later. As the desired form and style of my novels became apparent to me, the essence of the John Pasfield novel, I realized that it was derived from a number of novelists, such as Virginia Woolf and Marcel Proust, whom I'd been studying just before I began to write my first novel. It was only later, though, that I realized that their style, discontinuous narrative, radical juxtaposition of images, abrupt jump cuts, borrowing a term from film, was what had intrigued me as a first-year university student 30 years before, when I came up against the appealing style and baffling meaning of T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland. So for the next 30 years, as a student, as a teacher, and eventually as a writer, I read the poems, criticism, and plays of T.S. Eliot, a writer to whom I perhaps owe the most of all writers and whom I've drawn for ideas and inspiration over the years. He was perhaps my first example of the artist who sought to write consciously while in as much contact as possible with his subconscious creative self, and who sought a balance between the creative and the critical artistic selves. Now that's interesting, I think, because all writers are creative, but not all of them are critical. A lot of them kind of wallow around because they don't have any theory. They don't have a sense of structure. Okay, here's a quotation from Eliot. The historical sense, which is a sense of the timeless as well as of the temporal, and of the timeless and of the temporal together, is what makes a writer traditional, and it is at the same time what makes a writer most acutely conscious of his place in time, of his contemporaneity. Hard word to say. Okay, that's from an Eliot essay. Now, I have responded to that in writing, but I'm not going to read it, just for the sake of brevity. I'm going to move on to the next Eliot quotation. Here it is. To have given into one's hands a crude form capable of indefinite refinement, and to be the person to see the possibilities, Shakespeare was very fortunate. And it is perhaps the craving for some such donné, finality, achievement, which draws us on towards the present mirage of poetic drama. So Shakespeare was given a form, the Elizabethan drama, and he saw the possibilities. Eliot, to his chagrin, was not given a form and spent his career searching for one. That's the point there. Okay, here's my response in writing. There's another quotation from Eliot, which I cannot find, about the number of minor Elizabethan Jacobean dramatists who floated easily along in the wake of Shakespeare's achievement in providing for them a form within which they could convey their artistic visions without the need for a search for an adequate form. What I took from Eliot is that Shakespeare both inherited and developed a form, the Elizabethan Jacobean drama, which served Shakespeare in his time, but which no longer serves us in our time. All subsequent attempts at Elizabethan-style drama smack of an attempt to write what cannot now be written. Elizabethan Shakespearean drama. Eliot sought a form which would suit himself in his age. He did so in both poetry and drama. So did Virginia Woolf and others. The advent of modern poetry and modern drama, we might say modernist now, in the early years of the 20th century grew out of the sense that the old forms were inadequate to express the times in which the writers and their contemporaries were living. I took from this idea the sense that Shakespeare was lucky. Marlowe and Kidd and their predecessors had developed a form, a 20 or 30 scene play and blank verse and poetic language with a bare stage and many other conventions, which was perfect for the expression of their age and their artistic sensibilities. I assumed a similar situation for the Greek dramatists of the 5th century BC. The question, though, was as to why subsequent generations could not go on producing classical Greek plays using that format, or why subsequent generations of writers could not go on producing Elizabethan Jacobean plays, and it's unanswerable. Form has a time limit, during which it is alive and relevant, and after which it is played out and derivative. The only thing to do in one's own time is to search for or invent a form for the poetry, the drama, or the novel of one's own time. Now, writers such as Eliot in poetry and drama and Wolfe, Conrad, and James in the novel spent much of their time in experimenting with form. It was very debilitating, as both Eliot and Virginia Woolf had to do two things at once. Number one, write the poem or novel at hand. Very difficult to write a good poem, to write a good novel. Number two, while doing that, to invent the form of the Eliot poem or the Woolf novel. Both writers felt exhausted and empty after each major work was completed, and one can see why Eliot saw Shakespeare as having been fortunate to inherit a form within which he could work with the certainty of being able to innovate and develop his own and more sophisticated version of that art form. Shakespeare played many variations and in terms of form never hit any dead ends. He wrote 37 plays. Eliot wrote 4 or 5. Eliot as a writer was not so fortunate. His letters and writings are full of comments which indicate that he thinks he has written his last poem or his last play. So too are Virginia Woolf's journals, filled with the thought that she cannot believe that she will write another novel. Each attempt at a form which would allow each to embody the times in which they were living and their personal artistic response to that world seemed to meet with a dead end, and a sense that the completed work of art was somehow not successful enough to give them a platform on which to build the future works which each was eager to write. That each never gave up under this double burden. Number one, how to write the next work of art. Excuse my voice. Number two, what is the T.S. Eliot ideal art form or the Virginia Woolf ideal art form? Those two double tasks is a tribute to their determination, stamina, and artistic integrity. One can sense their frustration at how easy it was for other artists of their time to simply churn out work after work within the existing, but to Eliot and Woolf completely antiquated and therefore inadequate art forms. So you can churn out lots of work in the art form of your own time, but if it's so antiquated and inadequate, why not search for a new form? Okay, so that's it for me until I get to the end here. Here are some Eliot quotations that I do respond to in the book, and you can read if you go to it. The only way of expressing emotion in the form of art is by finding an objective correlative, a very famous phrase. In other words, a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events which shall be the formula of that particular emotion, such as that when the external facts, which must terminate in sensory experience, are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. That's Eliot. It's a very famous quotation. I've worked with that through my whole writing career. Here's another one, an Eliot quote. In using the myth and manipulating a continuous parallel between contemporaneity and antiquity, Mr. Joyce, James Joyce, is pursuing a method which others must pursue after him. They will not be imitators any more than the scientist who uses the discoveries of an Einstein in pursuing his own independent further investigations. It's simply a way of controlling, of ordering, of giving a shape and a significance to the immense panorama of futility and anarchy, which is contemporary history. Instead of narrative method, we now have the mythical method. Well, I have a lot to say about myth, but I'm not reading my words at the moment. Now, next, another quote by Eliot. The great vice of English drama, from Kidd to Galsworthy, has been that its aim of realism was unlimited. Okay? Now, here's a quote that I've cut down a bit, but it's full length in my book. From Eliot again. But it is now very questionable whether there are more than 2 or 3 in the present generation who are capable the least little bit of benefiting from such advantages were they given, if they were given a form. At most, 2 or 3 actually devote themselves to this pursuit of form, for which they have little or no public recognition. To create a form is not merely to invent a shape, a rhythm, a rhyme. It is also the realization of the whole appropriate content of this rhyme or rhythm. The sonnet of Shakespeare is not merely such and such a pattern, but a precise way of thinking and feeling. So, form and meaning and form. Well, I'll leave it at that, but that's a really interesting topic to discuss. Okay, another Eliot quote. We had made some progress in learning how to write the first act of a play, The Family Reunion, and I had, the one thing which I felt sure of, made a good deal of progress in finding a form of versification and an idiom which would serve all my purposes without recourse to prose and be capable of unbroken transition between the most intense speech and the most relaxed dialogue. So some kind of nuts and bolts technical talk there from Eliot, and I respond to that. Okay, the last section of my Eliot essay is a summary of what Eliot means to me, so I'm going to read my own words again. I owe much to T.S. Eliot, much more than this note can convey, both for his poetry and his criticism, which last, he said, was a product of his poetic workshop. It was in the Norton Anthology, a big fat book, my first-year university textbook, that I first came across the idea that a writer, such as Coleridge and T.S. Eliot, could be conscious about the nature of their work as art form. So that's very unromantic, but I was brought up on, Shelley, Keats, Wordsworth. But that a writer thinks about their writing. That was fascinating to me. And that this consciousness was an awareness of and an exploration of the interaction between their conscious and subconscious creative thinking. The wasteland continues to intrigue me under the topic of how juxtaposed items of information interact to generate speculative meaning in a work of literary art. Well, that's given me 30 years of thinking and writing, 50 years of reading and thinking. And I hope in future to be able to put more time into studying that topic. Okay, now, here's a conclusion that I wrote for this particular video presentation. T.S. Eliot was a very intelligent man. There's a game that I sometimes play in my journals when I'm reviewing a novel which I'm polishing. The game probably came out of my memory of a quotation from George Bernard Shaw, who said that when he measured his own mind against that of Shakespeare, he had nothing but contempt for the mind that can write such plays. Imagine comparing yourself to Shakespeare and saying he has a pretty thin mind. Okay. When I reviewed my novel about Einstein, which is not yet published, I asked the reader of my journal, who's smarter, the character or the reader? In this case, Einstein or the reader. When I reviewed my novel about Beethoven, which I can hold up here because it's published, Beethoven, The Ninth Immersion, a novel by John Pasfield. So in my journal, I ask, who's smarter, the reader or the character? Now, usually we think we're smarter than Othello and Willy Loman and so on, but what if the character is Beethoven? Who's smarter, the character or the reader? With this little game in mind, it occurs to me that there are two ancient sayings which have stuck with me for what I'm sure has been at least 50 years. Number one, the quotation, "Know thyself," which is often attributed, I believe, to Socrates. Okay, now I put beside that this quotation, that the wisest man is he who knows what he does not know, which is commonly attributed to an ancient oracle. So, based on these two ancient sayings, I would ask, which comment is smarter, wiser, more profound? Know thyself, or the wisest man realizes he does not know himself? Anyway, I would say that no matter what your answer, there are two branches of literature. Okay, number one is wisdom literature. This is the prose novel in which the author presents a story and explains what it means, so the reader can understand what it means. In the prose novel, the character, the author, and reader are all in the same situation, at least on the last page of the story, as they all understand what the story means, and they all agree on the one and only meaning. Such books are for people who believe that one can know thyself, know thy society, know thy fellow humans. Now, number two, the second branch of literature is speculative literature. This is the poetic novel. This is the novel in which the author presents a story and wonders what it means. In this presentation, the author invites the reader to read the story and also wonder what it means. In the poetic novel, the character, the author, and the reader are all in the same situation. They're all speculating about what the story means. And if any of these three draws any conclusions, they will not be in accord with those of the other two speculators. Such books are for people who believe that one cannot know thyself, know thy society, know thy fellow humans, but that one can speculate. And that speculation, not wisdom, is the highest reach of human thought. So, these are the two main branches of literature. Take your pick when you buy a book at the bookstore. Once again, this is my book. I'll just hold it up again. The Poetic Novel, Part 1, and it's available for free so that you can read it on my website, johnpassfield.ca. So thank you for watching this video.